Today on Unpacked.
She basically explained that it's not much of a big surgery, but she did say the recovery would take long.
So you did the procedure, and how was that first recovery?
I was in excruciating pain.
So in total, you had about 7 procedures,
Yes.
and this was over the period of how long?
For 5 months.
And did now the problems eventually resolve themselves? A fibroid removal that led to multiple surgeries and health complications. Today's guest is here to share her story. Let's unpack. Rixongile Ngobeni is a 26-year-old interior design business owner based in Johannesburg. After suffering with painful periods throughout her life, a visit to the gynae revealed that she had fibroids that would need to be surgically removed. Little did she know what the operation would lead to. This is her story. Let's unpack. Rixongile, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So take us back to, the time where you were experiencing your menstruation, but it wasn't quite normal.
So this happened when I was still young. I think everyone has it, where they're like, when you're in pain, it's not that bad. You're supposed to have pain because you're a girl. So I've had pain since I probably started my period.
Yes.
So, but the intensity started when I was in varsity, where I would skip classes because it was just too much. So when I was on my period, on my first day of the period and the day before, I wouldn't go to class or I wouldn't do anything. So I continued like that because everyone was like, it's normal for you to be like that. So I did go to a few GPs, got some pills. I even knew the names of the pills, that I needed to take, and that would help me for that particular time. So, but it just got to a point where it was just too much to bear. But I didn't know at that day that it was quite bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I went to my first GP, that was in 2020, in Jan, when I was like, okay, New Year's resolutions, let me just sort this thing out because it was complicating my life a lot. I went to the GP.
And just to be clear, it was only a challenge of excruciating pain when you were on your cycle.
And a heavy cycle.
Very
heavy cycle.
But when you weren't on your cycle, there weren't any other complications?
Nothing at all.
Yes.
I was perfect, yes. So on this particular day, I decided to go to the doctor, my GP, and just so he could check me.
Yeah.
But this was a very routine check because I used to do it every time. I didn't think anything would come out of it. So this particular day, he says, I think you're probably in a lot of pain, and I would probably recommend that you go to a gynae instead. I was thinking about it, but I never did it because I was like, gynaes are expensive. It's it's a specialist. Let me rather not, because I don't think it's anything that's bad. So that's when I was referred to a gynae, yeah.
Okay, so you go to the gynae, and what does the gynae find and say to you?
I booked my appointment. It was, unfortunately, I couldn't get a near date.
Yeah.
I had to wait for, I think, a week or two because it was Jan and places were closed. And even with the pain, I still had to wait. So when I waited and I went to the gynae on that day, I consulted, and she was like, okay, so she started asking me about my symptoms, and I explained it's excruciating pain and it's also a heavy flow. Nothing else was a problem. Apart from when I was having those heavy flows and things like that, I'd feel dizzy. But I didn't really think it was anything that had an effect from the period.
Yeah.
So I told her that as well, and she decided, okay, let's check your iron and let's just check you to see what's inside. Like, let's just do a scan. So I went to the room and she did the scan, and her face just lit up. She's like, okay, how old are you? And I was like, I was 25 at that time. And she was like, I didn't expect you to be having this, but you have a huge fibroid in your abdomen. So the option that could happen would be for you to remove it, because if you don't, you'll continue to have all these all the pain basically.
And when she says huge, usually doctors will measure the diameter, and I'm sure you don't remember the measurements, but did she explain how big it is?
She did explain how big it is, but I honestly don't remember the diameter, but she did explain how big it is. It was also because I understood it could be true, even if I'm not a doctor, because my stomach also started growing. That's another thing I forgot to mention. My stomach started growing, and it looked like I was pregnant.
Yes.
And in general, I've been a petite person.
Yes.
I've had a flat stomach.
Yes.
And so now when it started growing initially, because we're on lockdown, I thought, okay, it's because I've been eating a lot during lockdown. I'm not being mobile, I'm just gaining a bit of weight. But it just continued. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, maybe she could be right when she says that. Yeah.
Did she say it's the size of something?
Yes, she did say it's the size. It's almost bigger than the size of a grapefruit.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah.
Especially because your uterus is probably around that size. And
yes. And she did say it wasn't just one, but the others were not really visible. She didn't measure those.
Yes.
But she did mention she was going to take a picture of them after the operation had been done.
So she had said to you, our best course of action is to operate.
Yes.
Was this something that you agreed to go ahead and do immediately?
At that time, I was frustrated. I was very frustrated because it was a consistent thing. It kept on happening. So when she said operation, it wasn't something I expected, but to me it was, let's get it over and done with.
Yes.
So when she did say that, I remember she actually said, I think I went there on a Monday, and she has surgeries on Tuesdays and I think Thursdays. So she was like, if you would like to do it very quickly, like you could just sign something and we'll do it tomorrow. And I'm like, oh my God, no, like you can't say tomorrow because, I need to go home, talk to my family and hear what they say, So she was like, okay, it's fine, but I'd rather just have to maybe talk to them as quickly as possible because based on my iron levels, it doesn't look good. So that's what I did.
Okay, and then at that time, it makes sense that your iron levels were probably low during your cycle because you were bleeding, so having such a heavy flow.
Yes.
So when then did you decide to go under the knife?
I decided I decided to take the next week.
Yes.
So because it was on a Monday, I think, the next week, Tuesday, was the day I would do it. So I'd have ample amounts of time to do my research, to ask, to tell my father, and to just make him understand this is what's happening and I'm doing it anyway. So that's what I did basically. And with telling him, he was just like, oh, fibroids. And I think it's a very common thing. He was like, oh, okay. How long is it? So I was like, no, they're saying I can recover in a day. It's not that deep. That's what I said.
Yes.
And he was like, oh, okay, no, it's fine. It's okay. You can do that. I also have a number of doctors in my family. So I did speak to them and they're like, oh, okay, it's fine. It's not much of a problem,
Okay, so you then get booked into hospital for your procedure. What did the doctor say you needed to expect from this procedure? Because in essence, they're cutting you open to remove something from your body.
Before that, can I go back?
Yes.
When I was meant to go the next week, before you go, like before you do the surgery, you have to take a COVID test. And that was because COVID was very rife at that time. So I signed the forms to do the COVID test, and I had to do the COVID test on a Friday, so the results would come out. At that time, it took a bit of time. I think they'd come out on a Sunday, and then on a Monday, at least they'd know like the itinerary of the Tuesday, whether who's coming, who's not, and things like that. So I did it on the Friday, and on the Sunday, when I was sleeping, I get a message in the morning, and it's like COVID positive.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't understand. I didn't understand how I was COVID positive because I didn't have an inch of a symptom at all. I didn't cough. I didn't have a headache. Nothing. To me, life was going on as normal.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand. I don't want to lie. So in my head, I was just like, oh, maybe it's God, but let me just ride through the COVID season because after I found out I had COVID, she said I need to wait for 14 days just so it clears and then retest again to see if it's still positive.
Before going to the operating table?
to the table, yes. Because they wouldn't allow me to get in with a COVID positive test result. Yeah. So that's what happened. I waited for 14 days. And I remember it wasn't even 14 days. It was probably more than 14 days, like 16, 17 days. And the only thing in my head that was worrying me was my next cycle is coming. So that means I'm going to go through that thing again, you know?
Yes.
So that was the only thing that was stressing me about the COVID. But apart from that, I then did another one after the 17 days, just to confirm if the COVID was still there or not, so I can give a go-ahead to go and get the surgery. Did the second one, came back positive. Again.
Wow. So you had to wait and isolate again.
Yeah. I had to wait and isolate. And this time she was like, okay, maybe like ride it through 10 days or so and see what happens. Because, it probably is the fact that you probably don't have the COVID, but it's still in your system. So every time they test, they can still see it. So I was like, okay, it's fine. I waited for 10 days. And after 10 days, I did my third one. Still came back positive.
So you tested positive 3 times in a row?
3 times in a row.
Wow.
I remember the third time my dad was like, I think maybe we need to fumigate the house. Maybe something.
Yes.
So we did. We fumigated everything in the house. Literally everything in the house. And after that, after I think 10 days again, so that means after 10 days again, that's when I did my fourth one, and my fourth one was negative.
Okay, so now you're negative and the doctor says we can go ahead.
Yes.
And then it's time to go to the operating table. What happens next?
I go to the hospital and I check myself in, and she basically explained that it's not much of a big surgery. Most people do recover, not really recover, but they do go home after like a day or two, depending on how you respond to it. But she did say the recovery would take long when I'm at home, not plus minus a month. So I was ready for that. And that was the main reason why I wanted to do it in Jan, because at least I would have time to stay at home and not do much at that particular period. So I was ready for that. So I go and I get admitted, and I remember before I went to the table, before that time I had periods. I was on my period. So it was like maybe a day after having my period. So I had to explain to her, Gonje, I had a period. Like, is it okay for you to operate on me? Because like, I was on my period, like I just finished my period yesterday, but I couldn't. So I saw her when I was about to get into the operating room, and I explained that to her, and she said, no, it's not going to be much of a problem. And I was like, okay, it's fine. And she calmed me down, explained what would happen, what the procedure is. I had time to research on the procedure.
Yeah.
It was called a myomectomy.
Yes.
And I did ask questions with regards to why I'm doing a myomectomy, because there's also an option of doing a laparoscopy where they do that with they don't cut you open completely. They cut small holes in your stomach, and then they put in the utensils to just take it out, basically. Yes. So she said the fibroid was quite big. It was big, so they had to just cut it. So I have a scar. A very huge scar, like I gave birth, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. So after walking me through it and gone, that's it.
So you did the procedure, and how was that first recovery?
After doing the procedure, I remember waking up. I don't really remember much of the particular day, but I do remember instances of what happened. I also remember some of the things that happened because the nurses, after when I was getting better, the nurses were like, "Yo, you know," they told me stories of what happened and how it happened, and I could then remember. So what had happened was, on that particular day, I came back from theater, and I was in pain. And I was in excruciating pain. It didn't make sense for me to be in that kind of pain.
Yes.
So the nurses tried giving me medicine, and just injections, just to make sure the pain is better, and called my doctor. When they called my doctor, she came and they did tests. When they did tests, all the tests were just bad, as in like my CRP was high. I'm so sorry to use the word CRP.
And what is CRP?
They checking like an infection rate inside your body. It was very high. It's not supposed to probably be more than 5. It was like 100 and something.
Yes.
My blood levels were really high. Were really low. I'm so sorry. It was very low. Maybe that's why I was getting the pain. And I ended up having to get a number of blood transfusions in order for me to be fine. I think plus minus 4 or 5 of them. It was quite bad.
So what did they realize had happened? Is it that you had suffered severe blood loss and it had an infection?
Yes, but the blood loss was not the only thing, and the infection was not the only thing. It's just, those were just indicators of what is pretty much going on in your body.
Yes.
That's wrong. It may mean a lot of things, but at least it leads you to the right thing. So what happened was, after they gave me painkillers, I went to radiology, to the department, to go do an ultrasound. When I got there, I did the ultrasound, came back, and no one told me anything on that particular day. No one told me anything. They didn't really mention much. And then just maybe before 8 in the evening, my doctor comes and she has scrubs on and she's like, "We need to go to surgery again." And I'm like, "Why?" And she said, "It's because you're bleeding internally."
Yes.
And that's what the ultrasound showed.
Yeah.
And then that's when I went to my when I visited theatre for the second time.
So you go in, they open you up again to deal with internal bleeding.
Yes.
And what is the next thing that you encounter?
After the internal bleeding, I came back and tried to recover. It was quite a lot. After the surgery, I was then taken to ICU immediately, and I could have stayed in ICU for plus minus 3 weeks to a month. I'm in ICU.
And what is the reason that you were in ICU for so long if the internal bleeding should have been resolved the second time you went to theatre?
It was because the second time I had the surgery, I was already not in a good shape. Already. So initially it was just for them to monitor me, because in ICU they really monitor.
Yes.
So initially it was for that. But as time went, some other things then pretty much developed. Like I had it's called a Plural Fusion. That's when you have water in your lungs. And my radiology friend mentioned sometimes when your body is in so much pain, the first thing that reacts in your body is your lungs.
Yes.
So that's why that was there. So my gynae just realized as time went, when I was still in ICU, when they were still trying to make sure the blood goes up, the infection goes down and things like that, to see what is going on. And she realized I couldn't really breathe well. And at this time I was immobile. I couldn't do anything for myself. Let me put it like that. I couldn't even lift a cup for myself. Like, speaking was a chore, basically. So that's how she realized I had a pleural effusion, because the breathing was a bit of a problem. And every time when she comes, they give her a report of what's happening. So the pleural effusion was just a procedure that was done in ICU. I didn't have to go to theatre for it. Someone came and they cut me on the side of the thing. They put in a drain thingy. I'm sleeping at this time, and they drain the water out into a bag, and then they take the bag and they go and test it, basically, to see what is it, if there's any deformities, if there's something they need to worry about or not. Yeah.
So was that your third procedure now?
It was a third procedure, yes.
So what happened? And actually, your third procedure happened after how many days after your first surgery?
It could have been a week. or 2 weeks.
So about a week or two.
Yeah, because I do remember I stayed in ICU for a month, plus minus, 3 weeks to 4 weeks, basically.
Yes.
So it was in between.
Yes.
And then, so after that, after the Plural Fusion, I stayed a bit just for them to monitor me. And then I went back to the normal ward. And at this time, I was very happy because I wasn't thinking I was going to be there for quite some time. So I was very happy. I'm thinking I'm going home. Like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden it's done.
Yes.
I stayed in the normal ward for 2 days, maybe. Yeah. 2 days. And on the third day, on a normal day, I don't even remember this. I'm being, like, people are explaining it to me. On the third day, I got a seizure, bad seizure, and my blood pressure was like 200 and something. So they took me back to ICU. And when I woke up, I was in ICU. And that was a bummer because I was like, I was almost going home. And, you know, when I'm in ICU, I can't just go home. I still need to go to the process of going to a normal ward for them to see if I'm fine. So it was sort of like, oh my gosh, you're going back. Like, progress, no progress, what's going on? Yeah.
So after now the third procedure, you're back in ICU. What is the next procedure that you had to go through?
I then went out of ICU again, stayed for a bit of time and went home. When I went home, I stayed at home for a day. Yes. I stayed at home for a day. Very excited. And when I was at home, the next day, I had issues with my breathing. My heart would just pump like I'm dying.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, I told my sister, I was living with my younger sister at that time. She's the one that played a huge role in making sure I was okay. So I told her, I'm like, please take me to the hospital. Let's just go back again. We go back to the hospital, same hospital in Glen Austin, and they check me. When they check me, they're like, in casualty, they're like, everything looks fine. Like, you look fine. Your blood's okay. Everything is fine. So why are you feeling like this? I remember the doctor even saying, you're probably panicking because you had a very bad experience.
Yes.
And in my head, I hadn't really understood the kind of, the intensity of the experience I'd had. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's it. So I asked him before I left, and I'm like, can you please call the physician that was treating me here, just to tell him I'm here, and my chest is just giving me issues.
Yes.
And he did. He called him, and there's something called a clot.
Yes.
So a clot is when your blood in your veins just clots.
Yes.
So there isn't proper, I don't know, pathway movement. Yes. So it then causes certain symptoms. So the reason why a clot can happen could be because maybe you're on birth control, or most of the times maybe you're on a flight for a very long time, you weren't immobile, and also when you've had surgery. So when you've had surgery, you are immobile for a very long time. I remember in ICU, I think I was immobile for like plus minus 2 weeks. I couldn't even walk.
Yes.
I started probably being able to walk maybe on the third week. And a physiotherapist had to, walk you through it. Sometimes you can't even go. I couldn't even come from here to where you are,
So is it the physician who then realized that you have a blood clot, and the clot was where? In your lungs?
Yes.
Wow.
So he told the residing doctor at casualty to just do... It's a test called a D-dimer, to do a D-dimer again. It was quite weird because before I left, we did a D-dimer, and the D-dimer was negative. So it was quite, we honestly didn't understand how it came to being positive in a day, basically. So, but he checked the D-dimer and he saw the D-dimer was high, so I couldn't go home. I stayed in hospital, and then the next day I went to go do a CT scan. And a CT scan is where they then confirm, okay, you have a clot. So I had clots in my lungs, both lungs. Clots in both lungs, basically.
And what were the doctors able to do about it? Do they give you some blood thinning medication to get rid of the clots?
Yes, they do.
Yes.
What happened is they started me on a medication called warfarin. I did have a choice, but they do explain the pros and cons of each one. So I ended up taking warfarin. And when I started with warfarin, because it's a blood thinner, that's when more complications started. Because now I was taking a blood thinner, and I had been on I had a surgical wound.
Yes.
that then started bleeding because now I was on blood thinners. Yeah. So when I was in hospital in my stay, that's the problem I encountered basically after that. I started taking warfarin, and all of a sudden, I think maybe that was the second day of taking warfarin. On the second day, I woke up, I went to the bathroom. When I'm in the bathroom, like blood just comes out of my legs.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. At that time, I didn't even understand what blood thinning was. Honestly, everything was new to me. I didn't know what a pulmonary embolism was.
Yes.
I didn't know what a clot meant, if it was bad or good. I didn't know any. Warfarin, I had to call to ask, what is he talking about? Warfarin, like, is it a good thing? Should I take that?
Yes.
What are the implications? Because I remember he said, sorry, I'm
yes, no, go ahead.
He said you're not supposed to eat things that have vitamin K.
Yes.
And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, okay, so he explained spinach, you're not supposed to drink alcohol.
Yes.
You're not supposed to... So many things. There were so many things I couldn't do because I was on a blood thinner. So I didn't understand why.
So how did they then address the bleeding that was happening from your wound?
After I had as he was explaining that was when I was starting, so I can give permission for me to use warfarin.
Yes.
So after the 2 days, I started bleeding. And then after bleeding, he came in and he asked a surgeon to come and see me. So a surgeon came and saw me. I went to go do an ultrasound again. And that's when they realized it was sort of like clots in the womb, on my womb. There were blood clots, basically.
Yes.
They call it hemorrhage, I think.
Yes.
And I had to go to surgery again for it. So
that was for them to remove them?
That was for them to remove them.
Yes.
And to make sure I'm fine. So I went to theatre again.
So what's the next thing that happened? Because now that was on like procedure number 5.
Yes. The next thing that happened, I came back. The surgeon said he wasn't going to close my womb because there's a process of having a draining system.
So it's like some type of wound therapy.
Yes.
That it heals on its own.
That's a good word.
Yes. The only reason I know is because I went through something similar. Yes.
Okay,
so they don't close your wound. It has to close by itself.
By itself, yeah. Yes. So he put me on that thing that was supposed to close by itself. And I stayed on that thing. I remember I'm not so sure what happened, but I wasn't coping. I went back to ICU again. And I stayed in ICU. When I was in ICU, that thing, on some particular day, that thing just burst. Like I started bleeding everywhere, like on my womb. Like it was just a mess. And the next day I went to surgery again.
So what was the reason you went to surgery again? Was it some type of infection or something that
it was happened? Because the draining system was not doing its job. And this thing has to be closed, but when it gets closed, it might close with the clots that have already been removed initially.
Yes,
basically.
Yes.
So that's why I went to surgery. So the surgery was to clean the womb and to close it off, basically, now, instead of having this thing close it off.
Yes.
So I went to surgery again. They cleaned the womb and they closed it off.
Yes.
So when they closed it off, I was very excited because I'm like, okay, this is almost...
Yes.
You know, I'm going home, basically. And I went home. Yeah, I went home, and because I was starting with the warfarin story, warfarin needed me to go and check they give you a timetable of how often you need to check your INR, and INR it checks how your clotting effect, basically, if the warfarin is working or not. So at the beginning, I would go to the hospital and take bloods, maybe plus minus 3-4 times a week. So I had to have a nearby hospital that I would go to every single time. So that particular day after leaving the hospital, I had to go check for the INR the next day. So I went to go check for the INR the next day. But when I left home, because it's my wound, it had a Band-Aid kind of. So, but I see, man, there's things, it's like it's a pus or something.
So it's leaking.
Like it's leaking.
Yes.
But I wasn't sure. So I'm like, you know what? Because I'm going to the hospital, yes, I'm not going to casualty, but because I'm going to the hospital anyway, let me just go check. And this was a different hospital. Then decided to refer me to casualty just so they could check the wound. Because yes, I came there for the blood tests, but they'd rather just check the wound. So I went to casualty. And when I got there, they checked and they were like, but you just had surgery. Why are you coming to this hospital? There's a hospital in Waterfall. So why are you coming to this hospital? So I was like, it's because I came for an INR and I could do it anyway. So I just decided, let me come check it here. And they said, okay. The good thing about it was my surgeon was in both hospitals, but he was in the Waterfall and Glen Austin, same one. So that's why they said it's fine for me to be there. So I was there, they checked and they're like, sepsis. You have sepsis, your wound is having this pus coming out, and if we don't attend to it on time, it might go to the whole body and be very toxic. So we'd rather just put in the draining thing again, the same draining thing that didn't work. And I said, it's fine, it's okay. But before I got into the hospital, I had to take a COVID test again. I took a COVID test that was positive.
Wow.
So it was quite a lot. I remember that particular period, it was quite a lot because the day before I was in a hospital. So I'm thinking, how did I get COVID? How am I having COVID at this point? And I assume maybe also the nurses, it's also very important for you to be in a hospital and also keep your mask on, even if it's a COVID-free place. So I was in a COVID ward for 15 days in the hospital. I stayed there, the thing was draining, it drained and drained and drained. And in the process of it draining, I also had issues with constipation, and it was quite bad. So that was what was making me stay in the hospital for quite a long time, not the COVID. After that, I went home. When I went home, things got better, and I'm like, okay, there's light. This is going to be a good thing, you know? And then I went home for like a week or 2 weeks. Yes, if not mistaken, a week or 2 weeks, and then I had to go back to hospital again. I went back to hospital again because I was experiencing pain in my stomach. And
not your uterus, your actual digestive stomach.
I didn't even know what the difference was. I didn't even know what the difference was. I don't want to lie. But I realized I wasn't really going to the toilet as much. So that was also because I was taking painkillers. And the painkillers increase constipation, basically. So I had to take the pills with a stool softener, basically, but it still wasn't working. So I went to the hospital, the doctor checked me, and he said, no, you're not going to go home. You have a partial obstruction.
Wow.
And I was just like, I'm tired of being in a hospital, you know?
And the partial obstruction was in your digestive system.
And
that's why you were struggling to go to the toilet.
Yes, it was in my colon. So my colon was filled with dirt, basically. And at least I could still go out, I could still pass anything, whatever needs to be passed, but it wasn't as effective. And it was blocking everything. So had I not gone there, probably it would have been a full obstruction, which is a huge problem. So I stayed there, and I think I stayed there for like a week or so, and the intention was for me to go to surgery, basically, if it wasn't working. So they gave me enemas, they gave me a whole lot of things, and it ended up working, which was a good thing, and then I went home after that. And then when I went home, I think I could have been there for like, I don't know, a week or so. And then I went back again to the hospital.
And what was the reason you were going back?
My stomach was painful. So the problem was the stomach is painful. I'm not so sure what it is. I don't know what the problem is, but the symptoms also come with maybe dizziness or vomiting or nausea. I had a lot of nausea. I still do have a lot of nausea. So the problem was now I can't cope because I can't eat. There's nothing I can do. So I went back to the gynae and I said, I'm not so sure what's going on. Please just check me. And she checked me. That was in July. This whole thing started in Jan. That was in July. She checked me and she said, I don't see the problem. I don't know what the problem is. I do see a cyst on your ovary, but I saw it and it's not supposed to be giving you this much pain. And then she referred me to a surgeon. The surgeon said, maybe let's just check your stomach and see on a CT scan. The CT scan wasn't really showing much apart from something called, it assumed something called colitis. Colitis is inflammation on your colon, basically. So that could have been what was causing the problem. That's what they thought. And then I had to go to the last surgery I had was for them to inquire, basically just to see what's going on because the pain was just too much. And then after the surgery, the surgeon came out and he told me, you had a whole lot of adhesions. So basically my body parts were just stuck in one place. Like this,
stuck together from the scar tissue and the operation,
yeah. It was a lot that could have been what was causing it. My ovary had hemorrhage. So they removed blood out of it. What else, the last thing? The pus that I had initially, that was drained by the wound thing.
Yes.
It wasn't completely out. So they had to clean that as well, including the colon that was giving me an issue. So they basically cleaned out so many other things, which then made my life a bit better, way, way better. And that was the last surgery I had, yeah.
So in total, you had about 7 procedures.
Yes.
And this was over the period of how long?
Of 5 months, 5 months, yeah.
5 months being in and out of hospital, in ICU, in casualty emergency room. And did now the problems eventually resolve themselves?
The problems did not entirely resolve themselves, although now I don't have as much of a heavy flow. I don't. And I recently went to the gynae and she did say, I changed my gynae, but the recent one, she did say if I've had either a surgery or just in general, my fibroids would still come back. So when I went, she was like, it's coming back. Yeah. It's coming back. So it was a bit of a bummer for me because it's literally just been a year. And I assumed probably it wouldn't be back until, I don't know, like maybe for 2-3 years. I mean, leeway is, Yes. But the surgery itself, I think because I've been through so many surgeries, continues to bring me a lot of complications when it comes to my womb, when it comes to many other things that have a lot to do with my stomach, my digestive system, and my reproductive system.
So where are you today in terms of your health?
I am not there yet. I'm not there yet, but I am getting there. There are quite a number of things that I stopped doing simply because I couldn't do them, but I'm trying to get back to actually doing them a lot. Things like I couldn't drive. I had a whole lot of issues with driving. My sister would do almost everything. Now I do drive. I couldn't sit down and speak to you for this long at all.
Because of the discomfort and pain.
Yes, and the breathing issues. So I would just speak like for a couple of minutes and just be fine. So I would always be at home in most cases. So recently, basically this year, I can't exercise as well. That's another thing. So sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm gaining weight, but what can I do? Because when I exercise, it's just like I feel like dying. But this year has been a resolution of just trying, even if it's not exercising, but just walking around. The pain tolerance is high, I assume, because of the things I've been through, but I still do get a lot of pain.
What do you take from this whole experience? A lot of people that go through heavy medical challenges, traumas to the body, have a lesson that they take out of it. Was there a lesson for you?
There were a lot of them. There were a whole lot of them. And I'm saying that because it was really a journey, a very emotional journey. I mean, I had a bit of an instance, a very bad one that I will never forget. I was in the hospital. I came there, I think the 3rd or 4th surgery. I felt okay. And I came there with my laptop. And when I'm there with my laptop, I go to surgery. They say, oh, we're going to keep your bag here. I come out and I was like, can I get my laptop? Laptop stolen. They don't know where it is. Cameras, where is it? To this day, I still don't have my laptop. And let me just say the financial part of it was a bit of a lot. Sometimes I probably also think some things would have been handled better. I'm not going to say negligence, but now because I had to be very smart about everything I do when I go to my gynae, I ask her things I already know. So if she tells me things that don't make sense, I question it. My physician as well. If he tells me things that don't make sense, I question and I ask. So I think it made me very, very, very meticulous in terms of detail, especially when it comes to my body. Whatever I take, I need to understand why I'm taking it. Whatever surgery. Other people ask me, why didn't you have embolism?
Yes.
Instead of going for a surgery. And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't know because the option wasn't given.
We need to explain to the viewers what embolism is, which is basically little beads, tiny little beads being dropped through your blood vessel, basically.
Yes.
And it killing the fibroid from the outside. So it's not a surgical procedure where they cut you open.
Yes.
But that in itself carries its own risks.
Yes.
Which is that, one of them is that your ovary itself could die.
Yes.
Because they go in sort of blind.
A lot.
Yes.
Yes, a lot. But my desire would have been to have someone say, these are the options. Which one do you choose? Not for you to say, this is the option that
cutting you open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think my dad always says, because we all went through the journey together. Yes, I was the one that was sick, but my sister had her own journey issues. My dad also had his own issues. So he keeps saying, you need to have a second opinion. You need to have a second opinion, So I try to do that, but it does not always work.
Do you at all place any blame on the hospitals or the doctors for the infections that you got?
Some of them, yes. And I'm saying some of them, yes, because after going through all of it, I have an app from the blood people, where the people the company that takes in the blood. So some other day I was sitting down and I was going through all the records of what actually happened from both of them. And I looked at other things and I'm like, but I didn't have to have a clot. Because I'm thinking in my head, at that time, my blood wasn't, this D-dimer is not making sense already. How did you not see this? I didn't even start on Clexane. Clexane is also a blood thinner. But maybe had I done that, maybe it could have been like this. But I don't want to always think about that because at the end of the day, things are done. I think I just take the lesson of having it not to happen again because that's the greatest risk. I think that's the greatest panic, having to stay for 6 months, have the clot being removed, but still have the symptoms and then finding out it's there again. And when it's there again, I have to take the warfarin for life.
Yes,
know. So I think also the anxiety and the mental part of things is still lagging, but it's a work in progress. It's definitely a work in progress, yeah.
I think you've been through a lot and maybe how you speak doesn't adequately articulate the amount of trauma that you've gone through because it isn't just what's happened to you physically.
Yes.
It's also the toll it takes on you emotionally and mentally. And for the fact that you still have to be worried about fibroids, those growths on your uterus, and have to possibly deal with them again after all you have been through. I really appreciate you coming to share your story and just to share the different complications that you're dealing with. And I wish you a continued healing journey and speedy recovery.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hashtag Unpacked with Relebogile. Fibroids in themselves are already just a medical issue that many women deal with and aren't treated that well. Now to have a removal that has so many complications, it is quite a difficult situation. So to all of you women that have been through this, I'm sure you can relate. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I hope you take the time to acknowledge the emotional and psychological toll it also takes on you. But I also wish you all healing. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night. Next time on Unpacked, your friend had said you're going to put all your problems, all your hurts, all your pains on that road and run it away, basically.
Whatever your husband did, he's going to lie down on this road and you're going to run over all those challenges. Mountains are symbolic to hardship. It's not about you. The mountain is there, and therefore you're not going to conquer it. You conquer yourself.
Thank you so much for watching Unpacked with Relebogile Mamoja. Make sure you subscribe to my channel where you can get to watch more episodes. But more importantly, you can be part of our online community. Comment down below, share with us who you'd like to see on the show, what story you'd like us to discuss. We love engaging with you. Keep it coming and don't forget to subscribe.